Hello, it's Hebby. In this video, I'll show you how to make an army of floppy bean-filled dragons. They're much more simple than my other patterns and completely perfect for beginners or people who want to grip plushies violently by the throat and throw them against walls, but don't have an appropriate outlet for that plushie rage because they don't have a whirlpool plush. I made a pattern for each of the 10 Wings of Fire dragon tribes, as well as some of my other favourite dragons, which will come in a future video. The patterns will be up for free on my Patreon, which is linked in the description. You can use these to abuse everyone you know, because if you get enough of them, they're like shurikens. Oh, that's cheating! He's cheating on his girlfriend. And she has a boyfriend! Oh my god! This is the culmination of quite a long time of effort, and frankly a nearly unnecessary amount of weighted beans. I started measuring the amount of these in kilograms until it exceeded 7 bags of beans, and I gave up. But these dragons are significantly easier to make than the big ones, mostly because they frankly do not have legs, and mostly not a separate spine color, or like any features at all, practically. Been sandpapered nice and smooth. Which is perfect and ideal for my purposes, because I had to make these for a convention, and with my classes and study timetable, as well as making dragons for my Wings of Fire challenge, my booth was frankly malnourished, and I needed some plushies to make ASAP. Also, I needed some plushies that I didn't have to stop and film. That way I could do them on my way to classes. This pattern is made to be done 60% on the machine as a setup, and then the head is made by hand and the features sewn together by hand also. That way you can do it on the glorious Queensland public bus system. On the train, which is somehow harder than the bus, despite the drivers of all my buses taking corners like a wet bar of soap on a slip and slide. And of course, you can also do these in dungeon-like research facilities on islands, where you are trapped for the next 3 days collecting data about wildlife. You also might be able to notice that there's something different about my voice, and I'm sick. I don't know if it was the convention or if it was school, but I have germs. Anyways, we're going to be cutting out all the pieces now. If you're making this on the machine, add your seam allowance width of choice to everything but the head, forehead, and chin, unless you want to do them on the machine, which I struggle to visualize in my head how to do, but you might be more skilled than me, so I believe in you. Generally, as a piece of advice, machine sewing is faster but can be harder and less accurate, and hand sewing might take a little longer, but it could save a lot of time redoing your shapes if you mess it up. So anyways, we're starting with the spine piece. This can be whatever, of course. There's spikes and frills and fur in the pattern. Or there will be, if half of it is up on time for this video release. And then, pretty much the same as we do the larger dragons, we're inserting the spine between the body side pieces and sewing it up. This is the part of the body that is slightly trickier, because after we've sewn up the spine, we have to line up the underbelly with our seam sewn together parts, making sure all the feet go into the right corners. And then we sew that up one side at a time, making sure the feet are all round as you sew them. Follow this line drawn on the fabric religiously, because it's very visible if they have any wobbles or lumps in them once it's done. Not a problem if you do it by hand though. Great! Time to slice off your seam allowance bits and violently invert the design. Make sure to turn out all the little feet. Very important. Now, once that's done, I like to stuff the tail. I do this because I don't want the beans falling down that far, but it's a matter of personal preference. Then, the most important step, I add the aforementioned beans. You can find glass beans and polyfill plastic weighted beans to make the dragons floppy and have a good texture, online or at craft stores near you, probably. Try not to get just any old beans because sometimes they don't flow over each other and the material is slightly grippy, meaning they won't flop appropriately. And don't use the edible kind unless you want a wet, sopping, gross plush. Who knows, you might be into that though. I very lightly stuff the spine area too to give height to the back. But don't go overboard unless you want them to be very firm. Now I'm sewing up the extra parts for the body, such as the tail tip or head crest, which might be relevant to your creature, and the wings, which could also be relevant. Once they've flipped right side out, I like to sew veins from the center of the wings to the tips, and for night wings, I spot some fabric paint on there for stars. Now it's time to sew up the facial features, such as the nose horn, the head, horns, the ears, and all that. Then I snip them out of their seam allowance prison. But they need something to go onto, of course, so he needs a head, starting with the chin. As I said, I do this by hand because it's easier. But you might be able to do it on the machine if you have precise control. I sew the pointy end of the chin into the little gap at the bottom of the nose. Then I do the other side until it's all filled in. And now for the forehead. Once again, I start in the middle of the nose end of both pieces and secure them down. These floppy dragons have a certain wet, sopping kitten drenched with milk sort of look to them once finished. Not at all helped by the smooshed little heads. If you want to make your dragon a little bit pathetic, this is the plushie for you. Once you have your little freak's head sewn up, it's time to stuff it. This step is super important to get it sort of plump. The pattern looks best when you can distribute the stuffing all the way to the cheeks evenly. Then we sew close the skull and prepare our platter of severed eyes and ears, mad scientist style. Because it's time to add all the facial features. I like to put the eyes down really close to the tip of the snout because it makes the whole head very squished. I do support the pathetic wet kitten dragon look. It is at least amusing. I also like to tilt the ears back very far, sort of like how baby goats' ears are downturned. Well, some goats. There's too many breeds of farm animal to keep track of, and some of them look ugly, like the Damascus goat. Look it up if you haven't seen it. You will not be disappointed by what you see. If you love hideously ugly cloven hoof beasts, that is. If you're attaching patterns to the face, just pin them down and do a quick whip stitch. Whip stitch is the one you can see here, where I go in and out to the next location of the stitch in one movement. It's a super important stitch, and probably the most intuitive stitch when you pick up a needle and thread for the first time. When you're sewing on body parts, however, it would be beneficial to use a ladder stitch, which is the other vitally important stitch for beginners. And it's this one that includes going in and out on the first side of the two objects you're attaching, and then down to the second half and going through that completely too, pulling the thread tight as you go. Anyways, then I sealed up the open, gory neck hole and used that thread to attach the head down. As a piece of advice when sewing it up, try to make the head sort of floppy, and by that I definitely do not mean to make the stitches loose on the neck. Make them very tight and especially strong, but attach the head to a smaller area of the plush. So that way when you hold it, it sort of lolls back and forth. This will be very important later if you wish to strangle your plushie. But once the head is on, that means it's time for the wings. The only other separate appendage these miserable little slugs have to their name. Utterly useless. Anyways, simply attach these down either side of the spine. Try to get them even. It's a little difficult when there's no real neck to go off as a guide, but you'll do it. After that, it means he's done. Very graceful, and ready to smack my family members in the head. It's just too funny to hit people with these, but don't tell anyone I told you that if you make them yourself. And you totally should make these yourself. They're super fun and good for beginner sewists. Many people think that these spinny things are for cakes, but they're completely wrong. Anyways, this time I'm uploading all the patterns for the wings of fire dragons, but I have even more patterns to make different dragons. Those will be soon. But for now, it's time to give some tips for the other dragon tribes. Okay, skywings are pretty easy. They just have larger wings than the rest of the dragons and wobbly horns. Other than that, they're an extremely standard dragon. Ice wings. The amount of horns is kind of crazy, so there will be extra spikes there on the head and also the tail, which you just need a little more time and extra thread for, and you'll get it done. Sewing things to the tail tip can be frustrating if you haven't snipped off enough seam allowance, because it makes the tail too tough. Leaf wings. Sort of difficult, actually. Their wings are, of course, leaf-shaped, so put down some wing veins for them like those on a leaf. And most leaf wings have some scattered multicolored scales. Draw those on one side of your material whilst flat. These will be your guidelines that you sew around on the machine. Then put the secondary color you want the specks to be down on the other side and sew each of them. If you want to do this by hand, you'll just have to make sure to not pucker your fabric. Then, using some scissors, cut away all the excess until you are left with just the scales. They should sit totally flat. If they don't sit flat, it will slightly distort your final design by wrinkling the fabric. That is my dire warning. Then sew it up normally after that. Also, they need a little leaf-shaped tail tip, which is like the absolute cutest feature on the leaf wings, and I love it. But I'm sure you can figure that one out on your own. Alright, the Nightwings. Well, I did a Nightwing hybrid who is my OC in the first part, so just follow that for the majority. They have star wings if you want to make those out of fabric paint, as well as teardrop and star scales you can sew on as you're doing up the head. The Sandwings next. Basically all the same as the other dragons, except they have a venomous tail barb. Well, most of them have a venomous tail barb. And big black peepers. Also for most of them. I gave them a nose horn originally, but then changed my mind and brutally maimed his face, taking it off. It's still in the pattern, so you can do whatever you want with that. Okay, now Mudwings. Another one with a colour change sewn in them, which is really my benchmark for mild difficulty. Mark out the area of the spine you want your other colour to be, in the same way that we did the full-size Mudwing. Then sew the colour change down. Once again, you can do this by hand, but take specific care not to wrinkle anything and make the stitches not overly taut. It's very similar to the regular kind of plush pattern that I made for the Mudwings, to be honest. I'm sure you'll get it. Now for Silk Wings. Very simple, other than the fact that they have 4 wings and antennae. I use 1 large and 1 small wing for Silk Wings. As for Hive Wings, I use the 2 larger wings for their more dragonfly look. Also, they have the same sort of colour blotching as the leaf wings, and you should use the same techniques to do a pattern of your choice on them. Sea Wings! These are super simple. You can add the barbels or no barbels. I went with no barbels, as their chins touch the ground and it would look a bit weird. You can also paint their glow scales if you want. Now Rain Wings. They have the little ear frill bit, which you should sew up similar to the wings and apply veins to. Other than that, they're pretty simple. Hooray! I suppose you could also add the speckles down their tails and stuff. But a word to the wise. Never try a perfect circle on the machine. You ask only for trouble and frustration down that path. Okay, so that's all the tribes. Feel free to mix and match to make hybrids. It's very fun to do. Now I have the Elwiwi version of my dragon character, so awesome. I suppose I could beat people up with it some more. Oh, I'm also making a miniature documentary on lungfish for class. Enjoy this lungfish footage I got when I was on my way to the Gold Coast for the aforementioned convention. If I saw you there at the convention, thank you for saying hello, and especially thank you if you drew me a picture, because I really treasure those and they really brightened my day. It was very sweet. Also, if I saw you at the convention and I was standing behind the booth looking like this, I was not going to leap over the counter and bite your throat out like a jaguar. My face actually got tired from smiling, and I legitimately could not smile without hurting my cheeks, and I could not laugh because I had lost my voice. So there you go. One day I will learn how to set people on fire with my mind, though. Could be any day. Might be at my next convention, which is one I actually haven't been to before. But it's Kaiga Pop-Up Artist Alley in Brisbane, and I'm going there with my best friend. Brisbane, Australia. Some people might not know I'm Aussie. I think my accent is fairly mild because I have that snobby did literature in high school enunciation. But here's my snake to prove it. One of my snakes, at least. Anyways, back to the plushy point. Apart from the 10 Wings of Fire dragons, I've also made a random assortment of my other favourite dragons, like Haku from Spirited Away, Toothless, the Light Fury, Alexstrasza, Nozdormu, Raytheon, Caligos, Deathwing, Ysera, and a random assortment of other bits and pieces so you can make whatever you want. The rest of the pattern pieces will be up for free on my Patreon when the videos are done. But right now, not all my designs are complete, and I forgot to get a pic of the finished Light Fury. Anyways, thank you to Kimber, Cool Cloud, 88Stream1409, Kid and Mikey, Haps, Samuel Sanchez, Maisie Peach, Lisa Aguado, Mono Dier, Aninka Lamason, Gray, Solvi, Phoenix Fire, I Like the Dumb Bunny Shrimp, Fennec is Here, Trooper Cat, Poppy Willow, Inky Boy YT, Indigo, Woilies, Fantasy, Skywing Dad, and Jed Gore. Lick that button. See you soon for the next video. If you watch to the end, you get a secret reward of a kiss from Blaze. Mwah!